Thanks very much. Well, first of all, I just want to thank GenSpect for the huge amount of work that's gone into this conference. I think it's brilliant so far, and I'm learning a lot. And for inviting me to talk today. And the other thing is also many of the parents who contact me because of my sort of public speaking out about this issue, I always try to guide them, and one of the organisations I always suggest they contact is GenSpect, and I know from what they come back with that they've got a huge amount of support there. So I think, it's a really great thing, and I know you're developing your work even further, so thanks very much. So my talk today is a bit in two parts. I'm being a bit greedy because I want to tell you a bit about the Judicial Review. But I've also, as I've gone along, and yesterday I found it fascinating listening to the two panels that we had and what's been going on. So I'd like to try and incorporate some of that. But I'd also, if possible, like to get to a little bit of the clinical work and the understanding. And, what was said this morning was very much that, that we don't quite know yet how to approach this. But there are certainly things that I've learned over the last 18 years or whatever, and throughout my career really in mental health work, that I'd like to share. And I'm not saying it's the only way, and I'm not saying I know, but if it's helpful to some of you, then that would be a great achievement for me for today, to sort of convey some of that. So, okay. So listening yesterday, it was another reminder of how complex we all are, and how careful we have to be, really, not to apply too many definitive statements to this area of work and to this area of understanding, because I think it's complex and I think people are unique. So although there are commonalities shared and there are things that I can talk to in a general sense, I also want you to bear in mind, I'm not saying this is how it is, because I think everyone brings their own unique experience to this. And certainly in the clinical work, that's what I always try and bear in mind. Everyone is new to me when I meet them. So the human mind, and I promise this won't be a clinical lecture or psychobabble, hopefully, but the human mind is pretty amazing as it develops. And what the mind tries to do is it tries to look after us throughout life. So obviously when we're first born, we're pretty defenseless. And so if you observe a baby, they move between two states. And both Freud talked about the idea that as we develop, the first mind, or ego, he used the term, is the body. And then our experiences where we react with the external world and the carers, the people who look after us, it helps to create the mind, the ego. So therefore, there was a clear recognition from him that those things go together. And I think that's a really important aspect of the work that I do, to always bear that in mind. And then Klein, who was analysed by Freud, but she came along and she observed infants. And one of the things that she noticed is that babies, when they cry, and Beyond did this work too, so there were several of them I want to credit, but that they expel something when they cry. So when they get hungry or they're frightened or they're in pain or cold, they don't just make the noise, but if you look at them, they're rigid, they look angry, they're red, they're really getting rid of something. And then if you talk with people who've cared for babies in their early weeks and months of life, not only do you respond to that, you go, oh, it's crying, milk, change of nappy or whatever, but there's an emotional feeling in you. And what she observed and Beyond observed is that what we do is we pick up something that's been projected from the baby's mind, communicated to the external world. Now, in an optimum world, the baby has good carers, parents. I'll use mum in this circumstance because it's often mum, but don't shoot me, it's sometimes dad or other partners. But that it's a good thing if the baby gets heard, but also taken in. And what Bjorn called that, he termed it containment. And what he said is that everyone's experience is very different. And so babies have their own characteristics when they arrive. Some babies are very, give me a bottle, or breast and I'll be fine. And others are anxious and they need picking up morning, noon and night. But then there's a recipe with the external experience of the world. Now, the reason I say that is because in my work, throughout my mental health work, I've worked in all sorts of different areas, but I think one of the things that you notice is that, I should just backtrack. So Klein felt they were states of mind. So obviously a baby is in that early state. She called it paranoid schizoid state, but very early state of mind, a lot. But the idea is with development that we gradually learn that we can let mum or dad out of our sight, that actually they do come back, that the world doesn't get destroyed if we lose someone for a moment, that you can be hungry for a bit longer than you used to be able to, and you won't die. But of course, not everyone gets the same experience, and so that recipe can lead to some people, and that's where I talk about this idea of trauma with a small t. Some children can go through things like when they're a toddler, their younger brother or sister gets born, and they'll kind of think, yeah, okay, they're annoying. For other kids, that will be a trauma. They'll never get over it. They've lost their place in their mother's world, and she's looking at that one and not me. Who am I without my mum? And the other task is, of course, the separation. We have to learn to manage psychic pain. We have to learn that we don't always come first. We have to learn that we need to separate from our objects. And the other thing is that we need to learn that we'll survive that. And that, I think, is, that's sort of psychoanalytic in a nutshell. The idea, one of the ideas, there are all sorts of ideas, about how our minds develop and how we become kind of reasonably healthy. Now, the reason I came back to that is because we do also go into that state of mind, the more paranoid it gets, when we're under threat, or we like to just get rid of stuff from our minds. It's hard to be with psychic pain. So I've just prefaced the talk with that, and I will come back to that. But I think it's important because what I noticed when I went to work, sorry, my pad's just closed up on me, when I went to work at the GIDS, was I felt that the kids that I was meeting there felt a lot like many of the kids that I'd met in adolescent units who maybe were in there for self-harming, with anorexia nervosa, eating disorders, behavioural disturbances, obsessional compulsive. That for me, they were young people, kids coming with a distressed state of mind, but sometimes in the state of mind in which things had been got rid of. So they had, in a sense, split it off. It was somewhere out there. And that is, I think, that other presentation that you often get, because lots of people talk about distress, but I don't know about if many of you are working with these kids, but what I feel many of them have done is cut it off, that actually when I'm with them, things feel very dead and lifeless and kind of like, monosyllabic. Something's been got rid of. So I think what my aim is when I'm working with the kids is to try and bring alive curiosity. And I think I have to be curious and open-minded about what's going on in their worlds. And I hope with that kind of sense of a developing relationship, and that's why judicial review was so important for me, that I think we can hopefully bring them to a place where they feel a bit safer to express all the negative things, the nasty aspects we all have. We don't like to feel angry. We don't like to feel sad or hateful, or, we all try and get rid of it in the best way we can. But I think for some of these kids, it feels unbearable. They reject themselves totally. And the reason that Freud, I think, was onto something about that mind-body ego is that I think for them, their particular focus, as often with eating disorders, can be a kind of hatred of the body, or the body that's let them down, or some way in which if I could get rid of that, then I'll be okay. Or if I can create something else but get rid of that, I'll be okay. Right, lecture over there. So in 2005, I got a job at the Tavistock in the adult department, and I was teaching on courses and lecturing and working psychologically with patients there. For those of you that you don't know, and I do want to say this, the Tavistock is a different place to the GIDS in the sense that the Tavistock clinic had all sorts of, it's not a different place, it's a clinic which had all sorts of departments, and the GIDS was just one of them. And I was very proud when I worked at the Tavistock, because we worked in the adult department, and there were many departments that treated children, families, they treated convicts, you know, and they in our department we worked with adults. And it was mainly a focus on psychological treatment. I don't hate psychiatry. I think diagnoses can be helpful. I think medications can be helpful, especially when it's the middle of the night and a patient's been banging their bedstead up against the wall all night long. But in this circumstance, I went thinking that we were going to be doing the same kind of work that went on in the adult department and elsewhere in the Tavistock, to be thoughtful, to discuss, to open up areas where we could think about things and pose possibilities. And I went into an area where I thought I'd be doing the same. A few months into my work there, I was in a very small clinical team, 7 people, I believe, 70 referrals nationally, all year round, from the entire UK, approximately. And a case presentation came in. So a GP had written about a boy, 16 years old, complex background, taprasia. It's the sort of thing that I'd heard, you know, again, unique, but a lot of. So I'm thinking to myself, someone's going to take that patient in for some psychological work, maybe do some family work, and 4 or 5 months later, we used to see some patients once a month because they live so far away. The clinician that had been allocated that patient said, I'm referring them to the clinic, the endocrinology clinic. And I thought, was that the... And I checked my same patient I'd heard. And so I said, how many times have you seen them? And she said, 4. And it was, I can't describe the feeling, but when you're used to kind of one way of working and one way of thinking, that felt like a terrible shock to me. And from that moment onwards, obviously, you can imagine, I started to ask questions, and then I became a tricky member of staff. I tried to raise questions within the team. I tried to challenge what was going on. And I remember once saying, why can't we just operate a psychological service for these kids and the families till they're a bit older? And Dr. Duchelier said to me, because they won't come. And what he meant was, it was the clinic, it was the endocrinology that was on offer, which in a sense was what was bringing them there. Now, I blew the whistle. Long story short, I blew the whistle back there. They did try and take it up. I went outside. Once I realised my managers weren't listening, I went outside and I went to the clinical director at the Tavistock. And then Dr. David Taylor did a report. But really, we never saw it. We never really were given a copy of what his findings were. And we were just told there would be a bit more oversight from the adolescent department. We're going to look at our caseloads. But I realised that there was something very political going on. The influence from the organisations, the charities like GIDS and Mermaids was increasing, and I could see that it wasn't going to improve. And then it became so uncomfortable. And it's one of those things in a career. You think, where do I go now? At that point, I felt I had done as much as I could. Wind forward. So then you'll probably know David Bell. Dr. David Bell was, again, an analyst, a senior clinician, very well respected in the Tavistock. He was a staff governor at the time, and several staff from the Gender Identity Service went to him with deep concerns about child safeguarding, with tales of huge caseloads, children who were being sent off for endocrinology appointments after 2 or 3 appointments sometimes. Now, that wasn't all of them, and there were still some clinicians who were trying to work longer term. But the staff themselves were under huge pressure. As you said, Michael, the thousands on the waiting list, and there was pressure from within. If you read, the book that's just been written about it, the clinicians said there was pressure within to keep people moving, keep moving kids through. That is not a thoughtful service, and for me, it felt like a bit of a horror show when I heard about it. How I heard about it again, because in a way I'd gone off and had a career elsewhere in the Tavistock. Then I retired. My husband, Marcus Evans, also retired, and he volunteered as a governor. And of course, David Bell knew us very well, and he said, Marcus, will you keep an eye on this because they're trying to bury the report? I've made a report. I have deep concerns about child safeguarding and the treatment, but I think they're going to bury it. Marcus kept on pushing to get all the governors to see it, as did one other colleague, I think, but they wouldn't. He knew what was in it because David showed him a copy and why he wanted the concerns taken up. In the end, I think they were allowed to read it, but they commissioned their own report. Dr. Sinner did, the medical director did a report, and kind of, although he came back saying there were a few issues, really, the problem was that whenever it was raised, the senior management and the CEO, Paul Jenkins, would always say, sort of nothing to see here. It's okay the way it's going. So what then happened was Kelly J. Keane organised, Standing for Women, they organised a day. We all went to the House of Lords with Lord Mooney, which is where I met a lot of the people who are here in this room. People were invited to talk about this. Marcus gave a paper there. But it was there. I wasn't speaking, I just went to listen. And a woman who represented GIDS stood up and said, I'd just like to say we do very thoughtful treatments and nobody is rushed through this service, and, the denial line that they were giving. And I don't know, it was just one of those moments that I thought, I cannot allow that to go by. And I stood up, and although it's not like written like this in Hannah Barnes' book, because someone else was recollecting it, I know that the one thing I did was stand up and said, I'm sorry, but I know that that's not true, because I worked there back in 2005 and 2006, and even back then I saw a child being sent for the clinic after 4 assessments. So what you're saying actually can't be true. And I knew also about all the other staff who'd raised the concerns. But that was really all I said, and I sat back down. And we went to the pub. Stephanie had spoken there, so immediately, I had huge admiration for the talk. She can wind it on a bit, because there was a lawyer there were also some parents there, and gradually, and Michael, you were there, and gradually we realised that we couldn't get anything done within the medical system. And so we agreed that something had to go outside. The problem is Dave Bell was under threat because he was still an employee. And who was going to do it? The clinicians within the department wouldn't do it. In fact, the clinicians within the department, even when I decided that I would do it, wouldn't give me a witness statement. I asked them to make statements about care, but they wouldn't. So what I did was I said to Paul Conrath, OK, I'll do it. And there was a mother who wanted to do it. She had a daughter who had autism, but also other complexities, and she was very worried that her daughter was on the waiting list and about to go through this process without thought. So I went, all right, I'll do it. Not sure how good a decision that was. But I really struggled to find people in the UK at that time to talk. Oh, sorry, I've missed a big bit out, and it's really important. He'll kill me. No, he won't really. Marcus resigned, and that was how it got in the public arena, I think. Marcus resigned because he felt he couldn't go along with what the board were doing. He thought you have to hold them to account, and he felt he couldn't do it, and he resigned. And I think he was the first clinician, really, to speak out about it. And of course, he went on Radio 4, and suddenly it went big, and Newsnight got hold of it. And they came to our house, and Hannah Barnes interviewed us. And then I think it was through that, obviously, that he was part of it. But it was, I don't know. Anyway, I took it. I couldn't find people in the UK to join me. It was really difficult. The one person who did, and I'm going to call her out now, I saw an article written by Joni Walsh, about two people who were talking about their detransition, Charlie Evans and Kira Bell. And I asked Kira Bell if she would be a witness in my claim with Mother A. And I'm just going to say, Kira Bell is here. Because what she wrote was the very thing that I was fearing. When I read her statement, it was sort of all my, my fears and my worries, And so we communed and we spoke together, and she agreed to be a witness originally. But then as time went on, the team felt that she should be the face of this, because Kira and you other guys who were here yesterday on the detrans panel, you're the ones whose lives have been so affected by this, and I think you've been let down by a system that is not looking at the evidence sufficiently. Anyway, I'm going on too much, and I'm not going to leave enough time for my clinical stuff, so I'm going to zoom past. So the thing is, Kira became the claimant in the case with Mrs. A, and as you know, we won the first decision. It then got challenged. They agreed that children under 16, they categorised them, but effectively under 16 could not give informed consent to the treatment. And for those of you who are interested, you can go and read the statements, and there's a lot written about this. I'm not going to do that here. But they challenged, they made an appeal, and they won that. But really what they said is, this should really be decided by the doctors. So I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember a song called There's a Hole in My Bucket. But it's like a circular song. And I wanted to stand up that day and say, but they weren't listening. The whole reason we had to bring it out of the medical system is because the doctors and the medics and the associations were not prepared to listen. Anyway, that is it. I know we're going to do a Q&A, so I'm going to call a line under that part of the judicial review. I'm forever grateful for Kira for stepping up. And we've become friends, and, we stay in touch and talk about this. And so anyway, I'm going to move on, if that's okay. So what happened, because Marcus and I at that time were probably about the only two clinicians who were out in the UK, we got deluged with parents contacting us and kind of talking about the concerns that actually the 10 parents who had written a letter to the Tavistock raising their concerns, and I missed that out of the story because Marcus had seen that as well, they raised concerns about this. So it was parents who were contacting us, and I have to say, and again, it upsets me when I read the sort of blanket statements about the parents who are either transphobic or, intolerant of difference and so on. Because my experience has been, and obviously I know I get a certain kind of parent contacting me, but what they often say is, I love my kid. Whatever they choose to do in their adult life, I'm going to love them and support them. Their route is okay by me, but I don't want to make an irreversible decision before they've had an opportunity to think about it, and they need someone to help them think about it because we can't quite do it. And it's true, because I think unfortunately parents sort of go off when they first hear about this, they go off and quite rightly read up a lot and then get hugely alarmed, I think. And then there's a sort of clash that starts to go on because the parents quite understandably are trying to say, look at the evidence, look what happens, look at the risk and so on. But the kids at that moment, as you described, Stephanie, have kind of been caught up into something else. And I think their defences are going on. I think they found something that feels like it's keeping them a bit safe. So that sort of head-on, I'm not saying don't ever do it and don't talk about it, but I think you've got to try and take the heat out of it a bit, and that's the kind of work that I've developed. So let me just move my scrolling, because I've ad-libbed completely. I had it all written out here, so let me just find the space. So what we started to do was, and I absolutely agreed with what people were saying on the panel just now, there are very many different kinds of presentations to this. So when people go, oh, everyone should have, therapy and thoughtful thinking or watchful waiting, the problem is you've got to meet the child, I think, and see what their resources are. And I don't think you can do that immediately, because I have met some kids who seem very cut off, who seem like they've got no interest, but actually something does begin to come alive. And it's finding the root in sometimes. If they can't talk about their feelings, we talk about what bands they like or what films they watch, and then I get interested in why they like that film or why they chose their new name, or who the character is, maybe because it's often out of a film, and I say, what are the qualities of that character that you like? And that's how we kind of try to get going. But what I also found was that I couldn't just see every kid straight away. So we developed a sort of system whereby a colleague of mine who's also a child analyst, we meet the parents together. So we're like a kind of couple, and we meet the couples. And we kind of do what I would describe as a pretty ordinary child and adolescent family assessment. But we go, how much time have I got? I've got about 12 minutes. I suppose what we do is we ask them about the child's early history, were there any separations, how did the child sleep, were they having problems going to school, what are their social relationships like, because then you start to build a picture of the kid, and that's where I think these issues around, is it sort of quite an early onset thing, or is it something that develops more in the teen years? And again, I wish I had a lot more time, because I think there are so many different factors that contribute to the picture. And again, I can't say that I could put someone in an ROG or an early onset. I think it's really very complex and nuanced. But I think what you do find is when you've taken a history from the parents, you start to get a good idea of what this child's life has been like, and also how they perceive. Now again, it's not how the kid perceives themselves, but parents have spent, a long time with their kids, and they'll tell you, about the fact that, they never did this, or they've really struggled with friendships, they always fall out, they've been bullied, they wouldn't go to sleep, that kind of thing. And it just helps me to keep that in mind when I meet the kid. Now sometimes we just meet the parents because often either the kid is so complex that actually our assessment is that they need to be held in a full team, a community mental health team, which specialises in children and families, because there's too much risk involved. But sometimes it's also clear that the parents say they won't talk to anyone. And so then what we do is we try and help the parents think about ways of approaching this with their kids. And I did have some slides. The thing is, I don't think I've got enough time to go through my slides. So what I'm going to do is just go to my notes on this. So I think some parents, as you said, Stephanie, have been so terrified by the sort of media influences that their children are imminently about to suicide, or they believe that they have to affirm, which again is the message that some parents have heard. Or the other thing is, and this is an interesting, even if they haven't been heavily influenced from outside, they may be a family that's grown up really struggling with dealing with conflict. I often hear parents say, they've always been perfect children, so good, we've never argued. And when you get to adolescence particularly, I think there's a way in which the task, and that's what you're referring to, Michael, is puberty is like, it's a task, isn't it? Because you've got to learn how to be an adult, and you've got to take yourself through a really difficult time, and it's devastating. For nearly all of us, actually, it's pretty difficult, but for some more than others. Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry I keep doing that. I wave my hands around too much. So can you hear me if I move here? So I think that the task can feel overwhelming for some kids, particularly if you are more of a black and white thinker and you think there should be absolutes, particularly if you can't cope with change or difference, particularly if you're one of those good children who feels your parents are too fragile, and they wouldn't know this in their mind, but who feels you just can't grow up and tell your parents to get lost a bit. Because some kids, and I've noticed a lot of my kids, are only children. And they often feel they're absolutely at the centre of their parents' world. And, you know, they feel almost like they're betraying their parents by growing up and leaving. So that's what I'm saying about the complexity of this. I don't think it's just necessarily about the change of the body. That's very key too. So I think you've got to try and understand, and that's why I think we need this careful assessment. And that is why I, at the moment, until I see better evidence, and I don't know how we're ever going to find it, I can only go on my experience. But I can only say that I feel this has to be such careful work, and we should never, never make irreversible changes to children's lives when they are in the situation where even as healthy sort of children with not many problems, I don't know who they are, but with not many problems in adolescence, really, we're still finding out who we are. And I think so much of this is about kids trying to find an identity. We're all trying to do that through growing up, through adolescence, through puberty, through young adulthood. We're trying to find ourselves. And the difficulty is that so many of these kids, I think, feel really lost. And I think often that feeling for them has been around from quite early on. And it takes time and really sort of intense work to help a child feel that they can trust you enough to work in that way. Or, as you say, some children won't even go there. But rather than saying, OK, well, they won't go there, let's medicate them, I think we have to, as a society, get better at bearing difficulty, at bearing distress, at bearing pain. Because I think what's gradually happened is we've sort of developed an idea that children shouldn't suffer at all. Now, you know, someone might go, how could you say children should suffer? I'm not saying they should suffer, but part of our developmental curve, much as I watch my little grandson, who I adore, who's 3, who's just had a little baby sister born, his world has been turned upside down. He's furious, he's upset, I don't want to embarrass him publicly, but, he's struggling with it. He's making a protest because his mum has deserted him and had this new fiend that's come into his perfect life. But you wouldn't say, he mustn't know. He must never know he's got to share his mum. And I think that, obviously that's a very simplistic sort of beginning, but I think it's key because I think the difficulty is we're developing an idea that no one should have to bear pain. And that is why I think adolescents should not be put on medications. I think they should be helped to learn that actually they can develop their own resources to bear pain. And if they are people who are really, and some people do really struggle throughout life, but we've always had people who struggle throughout life. Life's not fair. And I think that if they are... If they are those people, we need to find ways to support them better. But I really don't think that medicalising them at this stage, at that stage in their life, is, for me, the right thing to do. I want to take time. And I would just say here, I'm not saying that I also don't understand that in adulthood, transition may feel like a solution for certain people. And I am not against that, per se, in them living their lives in that way. Of course, there's a whole other political confusion that we've got going on. But I think if someone wants to present in a certain way and kind of think of themselves in a certain way, and that makes them feel better about themselves and helps them get on in life, then I think we should allow that to occur. But what I don't want to do is to give kids the message very early on that they can't learn to cope. So I've got about 4 more minutes. Would you like me to say anything more about the case itself, or would you like me to say anything more about the work? And because I know you're not all clinicians, and I was introduced as someone just shout at me and say what you'd like.
Why don't we add it to the Q&A so people can ask more questions?
Okay. Should we do that there? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.